And now to the U.S. There's been a turning point on day 12 of Derek Chauvin's trial over the death of African-American George Floyd. On Tuesday, it was the defense turn to call witnesses, and an expert on the use of force justified the ex-police officer's conduct, implying that Floyd was resisting arrest.
Well, what part of this is not compliant?
So I see his arm position in the picture that's posted.
Right.
That, you know, a compliant person would have both their hands in the small of their back and just be resting comfortably, versus like he's still moving around.
Did you say resting comfortably?
Or laying comfortably?
Resting comfortably on the pavement.
Yes.
At this point in time, when he's attempting to breathe by shoving his shoulder into the pavement.
I was describing what the signs of a perfectly compliant person would be.
Well, the defense claims Floyd may have died from a drug overdose, not lack of oxygen from Chauvin kneeling on his neck. But angry protests have erupted in the streets over what's seen as violent law enforcement. And another African-American was mistakenly shot by a white police officer on Sunday. Dan Williams has this report.
After 38 witnesses over 11 days, the prosecution rested its case against Derek Chauvin on Tuesday. The former police officer faces murder and manslaughter charges for the death of George Floyd last May. The defense then opened its case, showing the court new body cam footage. One clip showed then Minneapolis police officer Scott Creighton arresting Floyd in a previous stop in May of 2019. The retired officer told the court that Floyd did not comply with police demands. Another was from Peter Chang of the Minneapolis Park Police, who responded to radio calls for additional help at the scene of Floyd's death last May. He told the court he was concerned for the safety of officers.
How are you reacting to that?
Yes, I was focused on the car, but then it distracts me, and I was concerned for the officer's safety too, so I just kept an eye on the officers and the car and the individuals.
Some 15 kilometers away in Brooklyn Center, further clashes between police and protesters. These following the latest death of a black man at the hands of a white police officer. Daunte Wright was shot and killed during a traffic stop Sunday after an officer apparently mistakenly fired her gun when intending to use a taser. The officer, Kim Potter, a 26-year police veteran, resigned Tuesday, along with the Brooklyn Center's police chief. Police arrested dozens of demonstrators who defied a curfew using tear gas and flash grenades. Some local shops were looted. The two deaths, less than a year apart, were joined outside the courthouse as the families of Floyd and Wright gathered together. A picture of raw emotion.
And then they asked him to put the phone down. Daunte put the phone down. I heard some scruffling. He got out of the car, and I could hear the police officers and scruffling with him.
Take your time.
I watched that video like everybody else watched that video. That woman held that gun out in front of her for a long damn time. A long damn time.
Yes, she did.
My nephew was 20 years old.
This is a city on edge. The death of Daunte Wright, while the eyes of the world are watching Derek Chauvin's trial, has thrown further tinder on an already volatile situation. And with the verdict expected in the coming weeks, authorities are preparing for more possible unrest. Dan Williams, CGTN, Minneapolis.
Now, what authorities are calling the accidental police shooting of Daunte Wright is quite common in the U.S. and has been used in similar instances in the past. And another incident in Virginia is adding to public concerns over police accountability there. CGTN's Timothy Ulrich reports.
No peace, no racist police.
New York City was on edge in late 2014. Americans awaited a verdict on the killing of Michael Brown, a landmark case that cemented the Black Lives Matter movement in the national discourse. Another shooting in Brooklyn added fuel to the fire ahead of the announcement.
This is an outrage. We are angry. There's no way a young man in a stairwell with two heavily armed police officers, and he's unarmed, should be dead.
Police shot and killed the unarmed black man in a poorly lit apartment block stairwell. The officer who fired the shot, Peter Leong, said the discharge was accidental. A court later found him to be guilty of criminally negligent homicide. Dallas, Texas, 2018, and another instance alleged to be accidental. Officer Amber Geiger entered the apartment of Botham Jean while off duty. She shot and killed him, later saying she thought she was entering her own apartment and believed him to be an intruder. Geiger, tried and found guilty of murder, was sentenced to 10 years in prison following an outcry over accountability. That same issue is arising in another case that has gone viral this past week.
Really? Get out of the car now. Get out of the car. I'm actively serving this country, and this is how you're going to treat me? I didn't do anything. Whoa, hold on. What's going on? Hold on.
It shows a police officer in the state of Virginia dousing a uniformed Army lieutenant with pepper spray during a routine traffic stop last December. The officer seen in the video has since been fired by the department, and the state's attorney general has called the incident unacceptable. And the man being pepper sprayed, Caron Nazario, says the officers violated his constitutional rights. His attorney says Nazario is also looking at the bigger picture.
We hold enough of these officers accountable for this action. Eventually, we won't have another incident like this. And I think that's what one of my client's major aims are with this litigation.
Get out of the car now!
Law enforcement and other public officials are protected to a large degree by what's known as qualified immunity. It allows for police to be shielded from being personally accountable for their actions. Proponents of the practice say it stops frivolous lawsuits. Opponents argue it allows for police to act with impunity. Legal analysts point out taking such a protection away would at least remind law enforcement to think before escalating. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
Now, for more insights into this case, we have Joseph Gregory Mahoney in Memphis. He's a professor of politics at East China Normal University. Welcome to Global Watch. Well, we just heard from the previous story that these accidental cases are not accidental at all. These cases of police violence largely suffered by communities of color. Do you think that these issues over institutional racism has been addressed enough in the U.S.?
You know, the answer varies depending on who you ask. Those who are sympathetic with police say that communities of color have higher rates of criminal activity and therefore more police intervention. And conversely, we find the other position, which holds that racial profiling coupled with longstanding difficult relations between police and communities of color are the primary cause for concern and conflict. Now, while there are elements of truth to both positions, it's really incumbent on government to proactively address the second cause.
Right, and we've been hearing about, in terms of accountability of the police, we kept hearing about the qualified immunity. How much need do you think there is for a rethink on police accountability?
Well, police do have responsibility, and I think we're seeing that in the case of the officers charged in relation to the death of George Floyd. But the basic principle is that if an officer, an official like a police officer, does his job properly, then he can't be sued by an aggrieved party. Now, in the case of George Floyd's death, the prosecution holds that the officer did not do his job properly, that he resorted to excessive and deadly force when it wasn't called for, and therefore he's being prosecuted.
But the defense part today actually justified the use of force by Derek Chauvin. What outcome do you think that might lead to?
My sense is that the jury will weigh more heavily the police chief and other expert witnesses who said that what was done was beyond training and was uncalled for, and I think that the expert witness testimony will be dismissed.
And about
by the jury, that is.
Right, and about the use of force by the police and actually by about the weapons that they own. There were growing calls in the U.S. following the death of George Floyd to defund the police. What's happened in the debate?
Well, I think that the defund the police movement has slowed somewhat nationally over the last year, in large part because it's misrepresented by those who claim that it aims radically to get rid of police altogether and permanently. In fact, the defund the police movement is really aiming to limit the number of calls that police respond to. Something like 90% of the calls nationwide, by some estimates, do not require armed police response. They would be better suited to social workers, mental health professionals, and others who are trained to de-escalate tense situations, as opposed to police who are conversely trained often to resort to violence in order to regain control. So although this movement has stalled somewhat, we should expect it to see it move forward in places like Minneapolis and other places. But to be clear, we don't see the complete absence of police. Rather, what we tend to see is the defunding in the most radical cases of local police departments in the city, but you still have county, state, and federal police who are working in the jurisdiction.
Do you think that this series of cases of a police use of force will lead to an outcome of a balance between both being able to protect the police safety, security, and ability to curb the crime, and also protecting the proper rights of the citizens?
You know, I think that part of the main challenge, and this deals with a lot of the issues that we have in the United States, is that things really vary by locality. They vary state to state, city to city, county to county. And so while we can talk about a national movement, in fact, what we really have are a multitude of different local movements and even local resistances to reform. So I think that to talk about a national change is something that's really far-reaching at this point. I think what we can hope to see perhaps are some progressive developments that may follow in Minneapolis and other places that will take the lead, and perhaps the nation will learn lessons from this and move forward on a larger scale.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Joseph Gregory Mahoney in Memphis from Professor of Politics at East China Normal University. Thank you very much for your insight. Still in the U.S., classes have been suspended at a high school in Knoxville following a deadly encounter on Monday. One student was killed and police officer injured in the exchange. It comes as the local community reels from off-campus gun violence that had already killed 3 other students this year. Kate Fisher has more from Tennessee.
The officer has been identified as Adam Wilson. He served with the Knoxville Police Department for 20 years and he was currently working as a school resource officer here at the high school. We're told he is out of surgery and he is in hospital recovering from that. The school has been closed to give this community some time to try to come to terms with what has happened. But it is not the first time that they've had to do that, because since the beginning of this year, there have now been 5 former or current students of this school who've been killed by guns. Clearly a big issue for this community, but the wider state, the governor, Bill Lee, although he's offered his condolences and his prayers for the community here, he's just signed into law just a few days ago some basically loosening gun control restrictions in the state, essentially allowing just about any adult who's over 21 to carry a handgun, either concealed or open, without needing any background checks or any training for that, something that gun control activists are very frustrated by. President Joe Biden has a different approach to this. He has just announced a series of executive actions in a bid to try to curb gun violence, but they are limited in nature. He and activists know that to make real change to the laws in this country, they need congressional backing. They need it to pass through Congress and be signed into law. And that looks increasingly difficult with such a small majority for the Democrats and so many Republicans so steadfastly against any change to gun control. Kate Fisher, CGTN, Knoxville, Tennessee.